Hey guys, welcome back to another episode of Almost Well Versed. Hope you guys enjoyed the last episode. It was a lot of fun recording. It was a lot of fun getting to see what people think about Water for Elephants. Like I said, it's one of my favorite books, so it was pretty cool getting to interact with you guys about how you felt. But yeah, so today we're going to be talking about the most recent book I actually read. It's called Forgotten Bones, written by Vivian Barz. This book actually came out this year, just in August. I acquired 2 months for free in Kindle Unlimited, where you can pick from Kindle will just have like a selection of books that you can pick from that if you subscribe to the service, then you get it for free. This isn't sponsored, just telling you how I acquired this book. But yeah, so Forgotten Bones was one of the recommended books for me, so I was like, I'll check it out. You know, I've been trying to get into like mystery and thrillers recently, so I was like, oh well, this is right up my alley, let's check it out. You know, it had okay reviews so far, so yeah. So in case you didn't realize from my last episode, me talking about this book is going to be full of spoilers. If you're interested in checking it out, I would recommend not listening to this because it's going to spoil the whole book for you. But I'm pretty much just going to go through the book, picking my favorite beats, and then tell you what I think. So, Forgotten Bones. Apparently it's book number 1 of 2. I didn't realize that there's going to be a sequel, but the nice thing about this book was, even though there is that sequel coming out, the story does have a end. You know what I mean? Like, it doesn't end in a cliffhanger. The ending isn't dependent on there being a second book. So that was nice. It is its own little self-contained story. So this book is set in present day. We're following 2 main characters. Each chapter kind of flips back and forth between them. So we've got a dude named Eric Evans. This guy he's a college professor, I think a geology college professor, and he is newly transposed to Southern California. He used to live, of course now I can't remember, I want to maybe out east, I don't know. He used to live somewhere else with his wife, but come to find out that his wife was having an affair with his brother, so that was a whole thing. So he moved to California, you know, to kind of restart his life as a single dude. He is also schizophrenic, which is interesting, but not in the sense where he's an unreliable narrator, you know what I mean? Like, he's schizophrenic, but he takes his medication. He is a fully functional, responsible adult in society. You know, he pays his bills, he can have a car, he owns a house, you know, he's a functional dude. He just is sick, you know? But yeah, so we've got Eric, and then we've got Susan Marlin, who's a police officer for the town that he moves to. So the book starts, like the little prologue or whatever, starts with this couple who's unrelated to the story, but this couple who's driving home from a night out, and they're drunk and horny, and the chick is trying to feel up on the guy, and he's like, stop, I'm trying to drive, get off of me, you know? And then he thinks that he saw like a little boy in the road, so he swerves and they hit like a telephone pole. I mean, everyone's okay, but you know, their car is trashed. And so then when they call the police, they come to see, you know, to take the report or whatever, and they're like, well, you know, there was no other cars, so, you know, we'll just say that it was an accident, whatever. But then when they were surveying the area of, like, you know, do they need to redo this telephone pole or whatever, they find a buried body right next to the telephone pole, and the buried body actually was a child's body, like a little boy in like denim overalls. So Susan was actually the cop that responded to that call, like when they crashed into the telephone pole, so she's the one there that first sights that body. And then you come to find out that the property that they're on, that property is owned by a guy who's a known child predator. Like, he just got out of prison for, you know, doing whatever with kids, and like, he literally just got out. Like, I want to say he'd been out of prison for 3 days, and they find this body buried on his property. Yeah, but then the funny thing is, they can't find the guy, like the property owner. They're like, oh well, everyone's thinking that he must have done it and then just jetted so he wouldn't get caught again, but yeah, so they can't find the property owner. And because they found that one body, they have to investigate, so they're combing through the property, and like as the book goes on, they're finding more and more children's bodies buried throughout the property. And so because of the scope of this case, they actually have to call in the FBI to come and help this investigation. And so when the FBI shows up, I can only imagine how it would be. Like tensions are already super high in town because of what's going on. But then like among the local police force and the FBI, there's tension because, the FBI comes in and they're acting like they're big dogs in town. And then you've got the police force who, it's their town, they know the people, they know the typical crimes. So it's just like a push and pull situation going on. And so since the FBI was brought in, pretty much the jurisdiction falls to them, that they're going to be doing the investigating, they're going to be doing the interviews, all that jazz. But Susan kind of feels obligated to continue her own research because she was the one who found that first body, right? And so she's talking to her boss, this guy named Ed, and Ed is really close to retirement. He's supposed to retire, like in a month or two. And so she goes to him and she's like, hey, I was the one who found that body. I'm trying to investigate, but he is super against it. He's like, no, don't stick your nose in it. Let the FBI do what they're going to do and leave it alone, And Susan was kind of taken aback because she was like, I've never known this guy to not encourage investigating, right? Like that's part of your job as being a police officer, is investigating. And so she's like, all right, well, I'm still going to investigate, but I'm just going to do it on the low. Like, I'm not going to let anybody know that I'm still looking into this. She is doing that. And then, like I said, it kind of flips back and forth between Susan and Eric. So the book, it switches back to Eric, who is admittedly having some trouble adjusting to this new small town life. Like he's in a new time zone, he's in a new teaching position, he's living in like a little house that he's renting. It's just tough, he's coming out of a nasty breakup in a marriage. His depression is through the roof because he doesn't, he feels really isolated. He doesn't know, he's new, so he doesn't know anybody there, he doesn't have any friends. And so even like his teaching job. So like the university he used to teach at was like a highly esteemed college where he was teaching like upper level geology classes, like people who were like geology majors, like the whole class would be interested in the subject matter and, come to his office hours, all that jazz. But in this new town, he's working, I think, at like a community college. So like, not only is it a community college, but it's like a intro to geology type class. So, everybody in there is only taking this class for like the gen ed requirements. Nobody cares. And he's sad about it, like that's his job. Anyway, so in this class, he actually ends up befriending one of the students. He was an older student in the class. Most of them are like freshmen or whatever, but this guy was a little bit older. And so, they hit it off, and the guy asks him, he was like, hey, you seem like a cool dude. Would you be down to help my band out? Like our band's drummer is sick or out of town or whatever, and we have a gig in a couple days. Could you help? And so Eric, usually he wouldn't say yes to that kind of thing, but he's trying to integrate into this new town, so he agrees. He was like, sure, I'm pretty good at drums, we can go jam out or whatever. And so when he goes to hang out with the guy, they actually hit it off super well, because he finds out that the guy is also schizophrenic. So they identify with each other on that level, which is nice for him, at least. So yeah, so like I said, he's trying to fill his time with activities, trying to make friends and stuff, because he realizes the longer he sits at home staring at the couch, he's depressed. And when he gets depressed, that's what brings on his like manic episodes with his schizophrenia, right? So he goes out one day, he spends a Saturday like sightseeing and checking out stores, and he has a really good day. And then on the way home, he saw like someone was having like an estate sale, just like a bunch of stuff for sale out on this big old property, right? So he was like, let me just go check it out. So he pulls over and he goes, and like I said, it's a barn full of stuff, and he's kind of a antique collector. It was something he never really got to do back when he was married, because his wife was like a neat freak, so she didn't like the mess. But he was like, you know what, I'm single, so I don't have to answer to anybody, so if I want some antiques, I'm gonna get some antiques. So he's looking around and he's like, it's like end of the day, I'm pretty sure everything's gonna be picked over by now. But he ends up seeing like a trunk, like a old timey trunk, like that you would have clothes or put stuff in, right? And it's not only is it old, but it's really nice. And Eric, knowing antiques, is like, man, this thing's about to cost a fortune, but like it's really nice. Like it's like the nicest thing out here. Let me just go ask the guy, like the owner, how much would he want for it, right? And so he goes and asks the owner, and he was like, oh yeah, you can take that off my hands for $20. And Eric is like, what? $20? Like, that's way too cheap. And the guy was like, yeah, I'm really just trying to get rid of it, because I don't know if you opened it or not, but like it stinks. Like it stinks to high heaven, and I'm tired of it. So if you want it, I'll give it to you for $20. And Eric was like, hell yeah, man. Like, I don't care that it stinks. I can just clean it, So he buys the trunk, he takes it home, he's pretty excited, he's gonna fix it up, stain it, whatever. And then, so he takes it home, and then he finally opens it up, and like it stinks, like it super stinks, like to the point where like he closed it gagging stinks, right? And then so he wants to look inside, make sure that there's nothing in it. So he's holding his breath, he opens it back up, and then he notices that like on the lid, on the inside, there's a bunch of scratch marks. But he was like, oh, someone probably like kept an animal in here. Like an animal probably died in here. That's why it smells so bad. That's probably what the scratch marks are from, right? So he doesn't pay any attention to it. But yeah, so he's excited about this new project. And to him, he feels like he's becoming pretty well adjusted to his new living situation, until he starts having hallucinations. Usually when he has like these manic episodes, or like when his schizophrenia is like flaring up pretty much, he has like certain tells that will happen that he's come to recognize like over his life. But the scary thing for him is that these hallucinations aren't onset by his usual like triggers. And he keeps having the same hallucination of a little boy in denim overalls, and the little boy will just like follow him around and will like screech, just like yelling really loud and just pretty much terrorizing him. And he's really upset about it, because that's not his normal schizophrenic episodes, but he ends up writing it off like, oh, it's just I'm really stressed, I'm just in this new town, just trying to adjust. So he doesn't pay any attention. He doesn't pay any more attention to it than he normally would have. So a couple days go by, and then he ends up doing the gig with that band, with the kid from his class, and it's at like a little local bar or whatever. And apparently in the town, that band has like a pretty big following, so there's like a good amount of people there. And Eric, of course, is nervous, but his friend is like, man, you're like so good, you don't have anything to be nervous about. So they go up there and they perform, they do great, everyone's having a great time, he's having a great time, is getting his mind off of like what's going on. And so they take a break, and then he goes to the bar, and then there's a chick sitting at the bar, and she was like, man, like you're really good on drums. And he's like, thanks, man. And then it turns out that lady is the cop, is Susan. And so they introduce each other. She doesn't, of course, she's off duty, so she doesn't tell him that she's a cop. But, they kind of hit it off. They're flirting a little bit. She offers to buy him a drink, but he's like, nah. And then he was like, well, after the show, like, if you're still here, would you want to hang out? And she was like, sure, but I might have to leave if I get a work call. And so he's like, all right, well, I'll look for you, And so he goes back up there to continue playing, and then sure enough, she gets a work call. So she leaves before the set is over, so they don't get to see each other that night. But it's all good, we're still in the beginning of the book. They could still run into each other. And so, yeah, so everything goes well. They have a really good set. Eric had a really good time. He comes home, and then immediately when he comes in the door, he was like, wait, someone was here. And so he's looking around, like trying not to move too suddenly. He's turning on lights. But then he's looking, and like, you know, all of his valuables are where they left him. He's not missing his TV or his computer or anything like that. Like, everything is exactly where he left it. And he's like, but I can tell, like, somebody was in here, right? And so then he goes to the kitchen to get like a cup of water, and then there's just like a big old pile of sugar on the floor. And he's like, what the fuck? And in that pile of sugar is the name Milton is written in it. And he's like, who the hell is Milton? Like, I don't know a Milton. And so when he sees that, he's not sure, one, if that's real. He doesn't know if that's like another hallucination. And then two, if it is real, why would somebody break into his house to pour his sugar on the floor to write a name, right? So he's like, what is what? What is happening? So he's like, whatever. So he cleans it up, tries to go to bed, but then the hallucinations come back like super strong. This little kid in the overalls is like, it's weird because, like I said at the beginning, you want to say that he's not an unreliable narrator, but then it's just like these fantastical things happen and you're like, is this real? Is this not? So like when he has this second bout of hallucinations, the kid in the overalls like ties him to his bedpost and like yanks the covers off and just keeps saying the name Milton. Like he just keeps saying it and saying it, and he's like, I don't know who the fuck Milton is. Like, can you leave me alone? Can you untie me? And so then and so he's like freaking out and struggling, and then he ends up just like passing out. But then the next morning he'll wake up and he'll have like rope burn on his wrists, or, you know, something got knocked over and then it'll still be on the floor. So he's like, what? Right? This is not like regular hallucinating. Like, something is happening. Story flips back to Susan. And like I said, she's doing research on the low, because she knows that if her boss Ed realizes that she's still doing investigations, even though he explicitly told her not to, you know, that's being insubordinate. Like, she could get in a lot of trouble for that. She's like going through old files and stuff. And of course, like, so yeah, she's doing research and stuff about child kidnappings in the 1960s, because the property that the children's bodies were found on all link back to that property owner's family, who's had that property. Like, it's been in their family forever. And there was a big stint where kids were missing. Either kids were missing, or like, you know how it was in the 1960s. Like, if somebody was funny, I wish you could see my air quotes, funny, you know, like, everybody knew that the dad was funny around children. But it's the 1960s. People minded their own business, for better or for worse. So nothing, like, he never got charged with, you know, whatever, being predatory or kidnapping, molestation, like, none of that, right? And so, yeah, so there was a kid that actually went missing. So there's the property where all those kids are found, which they actually end up nicknaming Death Farm. And then right next door is another property where there was a kid named Lenny Lincoln, and Lenny was friends with the kid from Death Farm. Well, they were kids at the time, but yeah, so one day Lenny goes missing, and they actually never found his body. And so because of knowing that, Susan's like, all right, so I need to investigate kidnappings in the 60s to see if there's like any correlation between what's going on. But then, of course, the issue is, since it was the 1960s, there was no real recording done of things like that. Like, she's looking through all these old files of crimes reported during, like, I think she was looking between like 1963 and like 1965, and all of them they're just all stuff like, oh, my neighbor is annoying because he walked on my garden, or, oh, so and so, you know, borrowed my chicken and never gave it back. Like, it's just superfluous stuff. Like, there's no real crimes that either happened or were actually reported, since it's a small town, you know. And the only information she can find about this Lenny Lincoln kidnapping or child missing case is there's just like one newspaper article written about it, that like, oh, he was playing hide and seek with his older brother, and then he was never seen again. And she's like, that doesn't tell me anything, And so she gets the idea to interview the mother of the property owner. So she realizes that the mother, not only is she still alive, but like she is living in a nursing home that's downtown. So she was like, well, she's the only person that I could talk to, like the dad is dead, and then the son, the owner, the property owner, he's missing. So she sneaks out for like, during her lunch break or whatever, and she goes down there to the nursing home and checks in, and she was like, hey, I want to speak with, whatever her name was. And they're like, oh, well, that she has dementia, so she might not be that good of an interview. And she's like, well, I'll still talk to her and see what she has to say. So she goes into the room, but then turns out the lady, she's not even like sick. She's like sharp as a tack. Like she's asking her questions, and she can recall specifics from like back in the 60s. She's like, this lady's putting on a front, but of course nobody's going to believe her that the old lady's putting on a front. So she's asking her about like, her son, the relationship she had with her husband. Does she have any idea where the son is? I know that she's heard by now that they found a body of a child on the property, and, if there's anything she can do to help them, to let her know. And so the mom tells her that, she knew about her husband being quote unquote funny around kids back in the 60s, but it was one of those things where she was like, well, he works hard and he spends times with his kids, if I leave him, I won't have anything. So she just kind of decides to live with it. But like as time goes on, he's just getting like worse. He's getting more blatant. He's getting more rash. And she's worried about her son. She's worried about the impact or the influence that the father is going to have on her son. And of course, she doesn't want her son to mess with kids, right? Yeah, so she's keeping an eye on it. But then when finally the day happens when Lenny Lincoln goes missing, everyone assumes that it's the father who did it, including her. So she was like, you know what? Fuck this guy. And she admits to poisoning him. Like she poisoned him with like some mushrooms. She just like put it in his food, and he was dead before the next morning. When he died, nobody really looked into it because they were like, oh, well, at least that guy is dead. You know what I mean? Like him dying wasn't really hurting anybody. So, but yeah, so the father dies, and she's hoping that it's soon enough to where she'll be able to save her son. But then of course that that's not the truth, because this dude has gone to prison for doing a similar thing, right? So Susan is floored by this information because nobody knows this. When they did like the interviews when her husband died, like of course she didn't confess to that, and she's like, I'm sitting here with a self-proclaimed murderer pretty much, you know what I mean? Like, but I can't arrest like a 96-year-old lady. Like, what? That's not gonna go well for anybody, you know what I mean? So she's really torn between like her duty as a cop versus being a compassionate human being. And so, I mean, ultimately she decides to not arrest her. Like, what are you going to do arresting a 96-year-old lady? Like, what? So, yeah, she doesn't arrest her. But then after that, the mom, like, doesn't want to tell her any more information. And so Susan's like, I got enough info from you. Thanks. I'm out of here. So she leaves. Yeah, so she goes back to work. And like I said, some time goes on, and tensions are still high between the FBI and the local police force. The only person that Susan can get any information about this case is actually the mortician. The mortician and her are like old-time friends. So she'll call him on updates about like, the condition of the bodies they find, if there's any linking information between them, all that jazz. And so the mortician tells her that out of all the bodies they found, I want to say the body count is up to like, it's a lot. It's like 18 or 19, I think. But out of all of the kids' bodies they found, the oldest one is that first one they found. So that kid in the overalls. His body, I mean, of course, it's like super decomposed at this point, but they can almost date it back to the 60s, whereas like the other kids are newer. But then he had an interesting bit of information for her, the fact that they've only found one adult body on the whole property, and it was an adult woman. And nobody can ID who this woman is, because they're like, who would it be? Like, the only woman involved in this whole thing would be the mother, right? But she's alive and in that nursing home, so nobody knows who this woman is. Yeah, so after finding that information out, Susan goes back to Ed and is like, just asking him, not necessarily about the investigation, but just asking him about, does he have any memories of kids going missing in the 60s? Because, of course, Ed, it's a small town, so Ed grew up here, he met his wife here, he went into the police force, stayed here, but when she asks him about it, he gets super angry and, like, not so much defensive, but just mad that she's pretty much being insubordinate, right? Like, he explicitly said to leave the case alone, don't do any digging, and here she is digging. And so, yeah, he's super angry and doesn't answer any questions. And so Susan was like, well, bump you then. I'll just keep investigating myself on the low. So the story flips back to Eric. Eric is having a rough time. He's not having a good time. These hallucinations are just getting more and more violent. The ghost or whatever is not even haunting him in his house anymore. Like, he'll just be out and about and he'll just like see him, right? And he's having a hard time. He's just like, I can't deal with this. Like, this isn't me being schizophrenic. Like, there is something else going on, but he can't really explain it because it sounds crazy, right? And so, like, one day he comes home from work and the hallucination is like fucking his shit up, and he locks himself in the bathroom and ends up falling asleep in the bathtub. He wakes up the next morning and his apartment or his house is trashed. Like, all his stuff is flung everywhere. Everything was pulled out of like his fridge. Like, all his ketchup and mustard and stuff is like sprayed everywhere. But then in all of the stuff that's trashed, the name Milton is written everywhere in his house. And he was like, I don't know who Milton is. Like, what is this? And so he is at his wit's end. And he's like, it's going to sound crazy, but he decides to go and give a statement at the police station. He's like, if anybody, like, he heard about the investigation that's going on about, like, the dead kids being found. And so he was like, I don't know if this is related to that or not. Like, sure, I'm hallucinating a kid, but I don't know. So he's just like, I'm just going to tell somebody and see if it's related at all. If not, I'll just, like, ask my doctor to up my meds, right? So he goes downtown and he says that he has information about the case, and so he's sitting there and he's waiting, and then finally he gets called back to, say his statement or whatever, and the cop who actually does his interview is Susan. And they're like, oh, haven't seen you in a while, like, I hope everything's okay. And he was like, I didn't know you were a cop. And she was just like, it's whatever. So they go back, and he was like, okay, this is gonna sound crazy. I know it sounds crazy, but I'm still gonna tell you that I'm having dreams, quote unquote dreams, about a little boy in denim overalls, and this little boy just keeps telling me the name Milton. And I don't know who Milton is, I don't know who this boy is, but I just felt like it would be relevant. And so he looks up at Susan, who's white as a sheet, and she's like, what did you just say? And he was like, yeah, it keeps telling me the name Milton, whoever that is. And then she's just like, well, I can't tell you any information about this case, but like, if I have any more questions, would it be cool if I called you? And Eric was like, yeah, sure, whatever. And so they wrap up and he leaves, and then you find out that the name Milton is actually the name of Lenny Lincoln's older brother. Milton still lives on the property next to that death farm or whatever. I mean, granted, he's an old man at this point, but he still lives there. He lives by himself. He doesn't have any kids. He doesn't have a spouse, no pets or anything. But she's like, why would this dude who just moved to town, who knows nobody, why would he come in here and tell me the name Milton? And up until this point, I guess nobody had the idea to interview Milton about the bodies, because, like I said, the property owners were known pedophiles. So when they found children's bodies, they just assumed that it was their doing. and didn't really go through the motions of interviewing other people. But because of this statement by Eric, Susan's like, we should probably interview Milton just to see, like, did he hear anything, or does he have any information? Yeah. So Susan tells her boss, Ed, about Eric, about the story, and how, like, this is a super coincidence and all this. And Ed is not buying it because he's still angry that she has so much interest in the case, which Susan doesn't understand why he's mad still. But yeah, so Ed, he's like, this guy comes in here saying that he's having dreams about dead kids and a name of a guy named Milton. Like, you're really gonna believe that? And Susan's like, they say that if you have a hunch, you gotta follow your hunch. And so Ed was like, we'll see. And so he actually ends up doing like a background check on Eric to see if he's like a crazy person. And then, of course, when he does the background check, he finds that at one point Eric had been hospitalized for his schizophrenia, which would show up on your background check. And then after that, Ed just completely dismisses it. He's like, this guy's a crackpot. He's off his meds. You can't listen to him. You should just stop wasting your time. But Susan's like, I don't know, man. Like, I just got a feeling that he might know something, right? And so she calls Eric and it's like, hey, would it be cool if I came by so you can ID some pictures for me? And so Eric was like, sure, like, I'm already not at school today, so you can come over. So she does, and she brings him pictures of all the kids that have been found so far on the farm. And, he's looking through them, and he's not recognizing anybody. She pulls those off and she puts out new pictures and he doesn't recognize anybody, and she's like, okay, this is the last batch. Pulls up the last batch, he's looking, and then he freaks out and he's like, this one right here. And the one he points to is actually a picture of Lenny Lincoln. So Lenny Lincoln, however you may feel about it, is the one that's haunting him pretty much, right? And she's like, how would he know? Like, this is too many coincidences. Like, how would he know what Lenny Lincoln looks like? Like, there's no pictures of him anywhere. He's been dead for, 60 years at this point, So Susan's like, there's something going on. So she leaves, and she is like, okay, I gotta go talk to Milton. Let's see, does Milton, the brother, know anything? And so, like I said, he lives by himself on the farm that's right next door to the death farm, quote unquote. And yeah, so at this point, he's old, and he actually has cancer, terminal cancer, so he's trying to live his best life for the amount of time he has left. But when he opens the door, Susan's like, damn, this dude is fit. Like, for someone who's old and has cancer, like, this dude is strong. Like, he's kind of jacked. But yeah, so you find out that he's like he does a lot of woodworking, so that's why he's in such good shape. So she asks him about the relationship he had with the neighbors, if he's seen anything funny. Did you see the property owner? He was only here for 3 days before he went missing again. And Milton's like, oh, like, I heard, but I haven't seen anything, or, I just stay in my house and do woodworking all day, so I don't really have any information for you. And so Susan's kind of bummed, but she's like, all right, whatever. So she leaves without any information from him. But then, so the story goes back to Eric, and Eric he gets invited out bowling from that friend from class. So he invites Susan, who says yes. And so they both go out bowling, and, they have a good time. They flirt a little bit, and he takes her home, and he ends up kissing her, but then she invites him in, and he's like, I don't think I can do that yet. And you could obviously tell that Susan was kind of bummed about that, but Eric he's dealing with a lot, okay? He's freshly divorced, or going through a divorce. He's got a child haunting him. He's not trying to fuck right now, So he goes home, and here goes hallucinations again. And the hallucination is like kicking him in the shin and knocking stuff over and just keeps saying Milton. And he's like, what do you want from me? Like, what do you want? And the kid, or the hallucination, just looks at him and then climbs in that trunk he brought home, like at the beginning. And he's like, what? And so then he's sitting there thinking about it, and he was like, all of these hallucinations and all this funny business started when I brought this trunk home. Like, and he even says it. He's like, I'm not one to believe in supernatural, but like, that's a coincidence, And so once he puts these pieces together, he's like, let me talk to Milton and see if he knows anything about this trunk, right? Oh, because I forgot, when Susan went to talk to Milton that first time, Eric went also. So both of them went to talk to him that first time. And so Eric gets the idea to take the trunk over to Milton's house to see if he recognizes it. And so he shows up and he knocks on the door, and then Milton, he answers the door looking all agitated and sweaty and like covered in sawdust. And Eric's like, oh man, I'm sorry, it's a bad time, but I just wanted to ask you if you recognize this trunk. And he had brought it up onto the porch. And Milton was like, oh, I don't think I've ever seen that trunk before. Like, it must be nice. But no, I don't have any memory of it. And so Eric was kind of bummed, but he was like, whatever. And so then Milton invites him in, and he was like, hey, would you like to stay for some tea? And Eric was like, okay, fine, whatever. So he invites him in, and they're sitting down and they're chatting. Milton serves him up some green tea. And while they're sitting there drinking tea, Susan is like spam calling Eric. And Eric is like, what is she, like, we only went out on one date, like, why is she spamming me, right? So he turns his phone off. I'll call her later. Turns the phone off. Milton was like, oh, I'm gonna go get some banana bread. Eric's like, okay, cool. And then while he's gone, Eric is like super feeling funny. Like, he feels like he's slurring his words, his head's getting heavy. And then, of course, he realizes that he was drugged. So Milton, like, drugged the shit out of him. He used, like, cow tranquilizer on him, or something. Like, some type of tranquilizer. And so he's fucked, pretty much. And Milton, of course, like any bad guy, he goes on a monologue about why he did it, about why he drugged him, and how he enjoys he enjoys watching things die. Like, as a kid, he used to catch bugs and then put them in like mason jars, and then not poke holes in the top to just watch them as they die. You know what I mean? And then once his mom had seen what he was doing, he stopped doing bugs, but he was just progressively moving on to bigger things, so like he would catch rats, and then he would catch like bats, he would catch deer. He's just moving up the food chain, you know what I mean? And that was just a weird hobby he had. And so then he confesses to playing hide and seek with Lenny when they were kids. That night that Lenny went missing, they were playing hide and seek. And the only rule that they had when they played hide and seek was that they could not go on the next door neighbor's property. Like, they couldn't go on the Death Farm property because, like I said, everybody heard the rumors about the dad being funny around kids, so they would try to not put themselves in that kind of situation, right? And so they're playing hide and seek. Lenny, of course, being a dumb little kid, he goes over to the property and goes to hide in the barn. And so then Milton follows him over there, and then Lenny hid himself in like a trunk. But then when Milton rolls in to the barn, the lid closes and it locks, like it auto locks itself. And then you hear Lenny banging on the trunk, like, let me out, help me, anybody help me. And Milton just sits there and watches him die. And Milton just like felt so good. He just felt good about it. He, in his twisted mind, it was all the balance in the universe. Some things have to die for some things to live, and for some things to live, something's got to die. And so then he confesses to all of the bodies that they've been finding on Death Farm were actually him killing kids. He was systematically kidnapping and like torturing kids. And then when he got tired of them or whatever, he would put them in different kinds of traps, different boxes or a freezer, all kind of twisted shit. He would just lock them up and then wait for them to suffocate, and then he would bury their body. And then, and his rationale for it was, by burying the kids, then he's got his garden and like his livestock, and they're living off of the land that the body is buried in, so it's all a circle. we're talking about a crazy person, okay? Yeah. So Milton, he's the person who did it all, right? And Eric, at this point, he's convinced he's gonna die, right? He's drugged. It's an obvious madman who's killed dozens of kids. He's like, well, today is the day I die, you know? And so while this is going on, Susan is at the police station, and she just can't get Milton out of her head. She is just sitting there going over all the facts that she knows after the interview with Milton, with Eric's story. The one kid him being able to ID is Lenny Lincoln, and so she's calling Eric, you know, just to see if he's okay. But then of course that's when he turns his phone off, so she can't get in touch with him. And so Susan calls the mortician, just to have anybody to talk to, right? So she calls the mortician, who's like, hey girl, I got some more information on all those dead kids. And she's like, oh yeah, well tell me. And so then the mortician tells her that the only linking information that they could find between all these kids is they found one single horsehair just strategically tucked in a place on the kids' bodies that you wouldn't see. Like on one kid it was in with the shoelace, and another kid it was like under their collar, and another kid it was like in their belt loop. And Susan's like, a horse? That's so bizarre, because Lenny Lincoln had a horse. Like, what? It's just too many coincidences. It's just too many things lining up together, and nobody wants to help her figure it out. And so she's fed up, and she goes to Ed, her boss, and is like, Ed, we need to go talk to Milton. And Ed is like, why the fuck would I want to go talk to Milton? Like, it's like 7 o'clock. It's almost time to go home. Like, why would I want to do that? And she's like, I don't know, man, but like, you always told me that if I have a hunch, you got to follow that hunch. And so she finally convinces Ed to come with her. And so they drive over to Milton's house. Milton sees the headlights coming, right? So like at this point, he drugged Eric's drugged body into the barn in the back, and is about to kill him. And Milton was just pretty much like, you know, you got too involved at this point, so that's why I have to kill you or whatever. But so Milton sees the headlights coming down the road, and he's like, oh shit. And so he, there's a bunker that he has on the floor, so he unlocks the bunker real quick, and then just shoves Eric down in the bunker and locks it behind him. And then when Eric rolls over, he notices there's 2 alive kids in the bunker. And Eric is like, oh shit, he's got 2 more kids that he's about to kill. But he doesn't have his phone. He's still pretty drugged, you know. He's pretty convinced that at this point, all 3 of them are going to die, right? Susan and Ed, they show up. Milton goes to answer the door. But then from the way that Milton and Ed greeted each other, it was obvious that they knew each other. And Susan thought that was really strange, because this whole time, every time she would like mention Milton, Ed never seemed like he knew or had a relationship with Milton, right? And so she's like, you know, she tucks that information away. She's like, okay, that's a little weird, but I'll ask him about it later. And so Milton, brings them inside, offers them some tea, and as the reader, you're like, no, don't drink the tea, don't do it, right? And so then Ed says yes. Susan was like, hey, can I use your bathroom? Instead of saying yes or no, can I use your bathroom? And Milton, of course, he's trying not to be sketchy, but he is coming off a little bit sketchy, and he's like, oh, you know, it's a mess in there, you wouldn't want to use it. And she's like, I really have to go, right? And so he's like, all right, it's this door down the hall. So she goes to the bathroom and locks the door, and she's listening at the door to see if they start conversating, because why would they? She wants to know what the relationship is, right? And so she can't really make out specifics, but she does hear them having like a heated conversation. And so she takes that as a sign, right? And so she's like looking around to see if there's anything amiss. And then she looks out the window, which is looking into the backyard where the barn is. She looks out the window and she sees Eric's car parked back there. And she's like, why the hell would Eric's car be parked in the back of this guy's house? Right? So she shimmies out the window and she runs back to the barn, and she, you know, has her gun pulled. When she gets in there, she's overwhelmed by like a really bad smell, like a really bad scent. And she's like, police, freeze, anybody in here? And nobody answers her. And so she's looking around, and then she like comes around some equipment, and then she sees the dead body of the death farm owner, of the property owner. So all this time they thought that he fled town. He's been dead on this property. And she's like, oh shit, Ed's in there by himself with this killer. I gotta go help. But then she hears something. She turns, and she sees Eric down in that bunker. And she's like, oh my god, Eric, are you alive? And you know, he's really drugged, like he can barely talk, and he's just like, it's not safe, it's not safe. And she's like, what? And then she turns around, and she sees Milton standing behind her, and he just has a pitchfork raised, aimed right at her head. And she's like, well, I guess today's the day I die, right? And so she closes her eyes, but then she hears a big bang, like bang. And then she opens her eyes, and she sees Milton, and he's clutching at his chest. And then Milton falls, and he's like mumbling, right? He's like, he got shot through the chest, so he's about to die, but he's like mumbling. And she gets close to him, and she's like, what are you saying? And Ed is standing behind her with the gun pointed, and he's like, move, leave him alone, move. And she's still leaning down, like, what did you say, Milton? And Milton, all he says is, ask him about Marta. Ask Ed about Marta. And then as soon as he gets the word Marta out of his mouth, Ed just point blank shoots him in the head. And Susan turns and is like, what the fuck is wrong with you? Like, why did you... Sure, he had a pitchfork aimed at me, but you just shot an unarmed dude twice. Once in the head. Like, what is wrong with you? And Ed, he's not answering any questions. He's breathing hard. He's like, tell me, what did he say to you? And she's just like, what? And Ed's just, tell me what Milton said to you. And she said, Milton said to ask you about Marta. And he looks at her and was just like... Kid, I told you to stay out of it. And then just pistol whips her. And at this point, I'm like, okay, what is happening? So she comes to, and she's handcuffed to some equipment. And she's like, Ed, like, what is going on? What is wrong with you, right? And Ed is just like, well, I guess I gotta tell you the truth, right? The reason why he didn't want her to investigate into this whole thing is because he knew, not only did he know that it was Milton that he was involved with it, but this name Marta. So when he was a teenager, he dated this girl named Marta. He was kind of a playboy and would just mess around with a bunch of women. And come to find out that, of course, she gets pregnant. But at this point, he's left for like the police academy, right? And so he's in police school. And one day, out of the blue, Marta shows up to his house with this little boy, with a son. And she's just like, I want you to be a father. And Ed is just like, what? Like, he's engaged at the time. He's in the police academy, like, super killing it. And he's like, I can't. Like, this would ruin my life. Like, if I was with her and admitted to having this child, like, this would ruin my life, you know? And so he's freaking out. And he's old friends with Milton. And so he's just airing his problems out, you know, to Milton. And he's like, you know, I don't know what to do. Do you have any ideas? And Milton was like, oh, I got an idea. Why don't you bring her and the boy over for lunch tomorrow? We can all have lunch and we can like work it out, right? And so Ed's like, all right, cool. So the next day comes, Ed takes Marta and the boy over there. They have a nice lunch. They were playing out in the backyard. And then Milton was like, hey, can you get the dessert from inside with Marta? And Ed was like, okay, sure. So him and Marta go inside to get the dessert. While they're inside, Milton grabs the little boy and then just like puts a plastic bag on his head and smothers him. And Marta hears a struggle. She hears something, so she comes back outside. She busted through the door and she's like, what are you doing? Leave my baby alone. But at this point, he's already dead, right? And Milton is just like, just shrugs his shoulders. And she's hysterical. Like, she's screaming, she's kicking, she's punching, everything. Like, this guy just killed her child, right? And Ed hears the commotion and he peeks out and he sees the boy on the ground and he sees Marta being hysterical. And he's like, he just has the thought to himself, and he was like, if she leaves, she's gonna tell everyone what happened, and then my life is really over, right? And so she's like hitting him, like, why did you bring me here? You knew he was gonna do this, and blah blah blah. And he just looks at her and he picks up a rock and he just busts her upside the head with this rock. and she drops, and then now they've got two dead bodies, right? And so Ed is just sitting there in shock. He can't believe what just happened, and all Milton says is, "I'll take care of it. You go home." And so Ed packs his stuff up and he goes home, and he never told anybody about it. Nobody knew what happened. The only person that knew about this was Milton. Yeah, so whenever they showed up to his house, whenever Ed and Susan show up to the house and they were having that heated discussion, Milton pretty much told him that if he's here to arrest him, that he planted stuff all through the house linking Ed to the case of killing Marta and that little boy. So, they're in it together pretty much. And the whole time Susan's listening to this, and she's like, "Why are you telling me this? Like, why are you even bothering to tell me all this? If you lived with it for 50 years or whatever." And he was like, "Well, I'm telling you because you're not getting out of this alive," pretty much. And she's flabbergasted at this point. She's like, "I've known this dude the whole time I've been in the police force, and now I'm learning that he's a murderer, like he was an accomplice to a murderer." And so Ed just rolls up to her and gets on top of her and is going to strangle her. So he's got his hands around her neck. He's choking her out. Things are going dark. She's trying to hang on, but there's nobody there that can help her. So she is like reaching, she's trying to grab anything. Is there a gun? Is there that pitchfork? Anything nearby that she can use for self-defense. And so she gets a little bit of wiggle room, and then her hand lands on something, and she doesn't care what it is. It ends up being a trowel. She grabs that trowel and she just swings it upwards, and she gets him right in the neck. And then Ed, of course, he lets go of her neck, and he's grabbing his, and he's just blubbering, and then he just falls over and he dies. And that was the end. Yeah, that was the end. My God. So yeah, after that, she's able to save Eric and those two little kids, and then there's a little epilogue. And in that epilogue, it shows Eric and Susan, they acquired the ashes for Lenny Lincoln and his horse, because so after all the dust settled and they went through Milton's house, you actually find that Lenny's horse was suffocated also. Like, he killed the horse after he killed Lenny, and then buried the horse on his property. So Susan and Eric, they get the ashes for both Lenny Lincoln and that horse. They go and cinematically sprinkle them out into the ocean and let them be free, and then it ends with them being together or whatever, But yeah, so that was Forgotten Bones. It was a wild trip. Like, the whole time I'm reading this, like, that it's gonna be a mystery thriller type book, right? But my only complaint about it is, one, as soon as Milton is introduced in the story, you can pretty much assume that it was him that was going to do it, right? Like, why would the property owner he just got out of prison, why would he immediately kill another kid and then go into hiding? You could smell that setup from a mile away. And then the whole involvement with Ed, I don't know. I just kind of felt like she didn't know, like, she knew that when I say she, I mean the author. She knew, like, what kind of ending she wanted, but I don't know if she knew how to get there, because the whole business with Ed is just kind of it's shoved in there in the last, 15 pages or whatever of the book. So it was that kind of felt tacked on. But I mean, overall, like, as a whole, I will say that I enjoyed Forgotten Bones. Would I recommend it? That's tough, because I'll say it's tough because of the subject matter, right? So, like, after I finished reading it and I went on Goodreads to check it out, or to see what other people have said about the book, that was a lot of people's complaints about the book, was just the subject matter, like how gruesome, and it wasn't necessarily graphic, but it's a very touchy, uncomfortable subject, right? So, like, a lot of people didn't enjoy that. Personally, I liked fucked up shit, right? So, like, that wasn't really that bad for me. Like, the subject matter, that wasn't the deterrent for me. It was more so, I wish even if it wasn't a twist, like, I just wish the ending was a little better, a little more cohesive, I guess, you know? So with that ending, it really makes me curious as to what the second book is going to be, right? Because like I said, it did end in a way where it's a standalone story. You know, you get the closure at the end. The killer dies, the accomplice dies, Lenny and the horse, their ashes are laid to rest. Like, you know, you get that closure. So I'm really curious as to what the sequel is going to be about. Yeah. So would I recommend it? I'm gonna go with a soft yes. If you're into that kind of thing, like if the subject matter isn't too tough for you, go for it. But if not, you know, there's other mystery thrillers that are debatably better than this one. But yeah, guys, so that was Forgotten Bones. Let me know what you think about this episode. I forgot to plug myself on my last episode, but check me out I'm on all social media. I'm on Instagram, just Almost Well Versed. I'm on Twitter. I'm trying to be cool. I'm on Twitter now. That's AWV Podcast. Yeah, like me on iTunes. Subscribe to me on Spotify. I don't know where else people listen to podcasts, because those are only two places I do. But, you know, like this on YouTube, all that jazz. And let me know if you guys have any recommendations of books that you want to read. I do have kind of a working list of books that I want to hit. I'm thinking I might delve into some comics, which is exciting. But yeah, like I said, love you guys. I'll see you next week.